Well, that song, it always ends so abruptly, and here we are just staring into the camera.
I know. It always feels like that. Well, good morning. Welcome to the Project Failure Files. And yeah, just a simple introduction.
Yes. Yeah, love that.
This series is for anyone who manages projects for a living. If you have ever been or are planning to be a project manager, program manager, operations manager, group manager, or maybe own your own business where you wear all the hats, this weekly series is definitely for you. I'm Sharon Weaver, CEO of Smarter Consulting.
And I am Christian Buckley, founder of Collab Talk, and welcome to another episode of our series where Sharon and I deviate slightly from the path and explore project management topics from the perspective of what not to do as you manage projects. So in each episode of the Project Failure Files, we'll talk about all the common pitfalls, sharing personal stories and experiences, and exploring strategies and best practices to help you to be successful.
Speaking of pitfalls, in this episode, we're going to talk about the pitfalls of overregulation when using governance as a hammer and what you can do to avoid them.
Thankfully, Sharon, it is incredibly rare for people to grab hold of what little power they could garner and become tyrants. It's just
It's so
hardly
rare.
ever. I know.
So rare. Just
I know.
never happens ever. Mm-mm.
And thick gelatinous sarcasm aside, as with every episode, please feel free to comment throughout the episode and share your experiences and any great examples or feedback that we may have missed.
Okay, let's get started. It's time to pick up the hammer of governance and bring it down on this topic.
Sharon, I am wearing hammer pants today, so I won't stand up, but I just want that to be out there. Just appropriately, dress for success, Sharon.
It's time.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting talking about. So the word governance, of course, is really loaded. I just came back from Las Vegas, sitting down in the expo hall at the Power Platform Community Conference for a week at the MGM Grand, talking about governance all week long and what that means to different organizations. And it's funny, like that, of course, we're talking about technology and Power Platform and SharePoint and Teams and kind of all those products. Products aside, my experience with IT governance began 30 years ago and ended up leading an organization that was putting a methodology in place. And it's kind of a common scenario where it was there needs to be structure, repeatability, scalability of the projects. My director at that time was saying, I need to have visibility over all of the projects, all of the PMs, the business analysts, the tech writers. I need to know what people are working on, where we are in that, so that when the VPs come to her, she can answer fundamental questions around the status of a project. And so that's the kind of the goal. When you think of the broader topic of governance, that's what I think of. I think, what is the structure that's needed to give management visibility and to know when do we need to make decisions? When do you need my help to unblock things? When do you need me to get out of the way and let you do your jobs?
Yeah. I definitely think, like at a high level, governance is that I always say it's a fine balance, right? It's a fine balance between enough top level, insight, understanding, power, whatever word you want to call, but that top level of, making sure that everything's going the way that it should, making sure it's defined, making sure it's metriced, all those types of things. Security, right? Governance falls into security. So it's that fine line of making sure everything is going on the way that it should, but married up with the ability for people to actually be able to do their jobs. And so governance in and of itself is our ability to make sure that we're doing what we said we would do the right way, but hopefully not impeding on the people who actually need to do it.
I love the imagery, but I always phrase it this way of that governance should be guardrails. It shouldn't be a
Mhm.
prison that you're in. It's like you must follow all of this structure. Because sometimes there are very quick, short projects that don't need all the bureaucratic layers
Hmm.
top of that. It's like, hey, we don't need to go and do this definition. We don't need this. We just here, just kind of an accelerated timeline. A week later, knock this thing out. The problem, so I've been in organizations where we approached it as, hey, there's this quick thing, and then it turned into something larger. But when you have the structure behind it, you know what you're skipping. So if it suddenly expands, you know what gaps you need to go fill. You know what you need to go back to what you tried to skip over because you have that structure. And I always like with those little projects too, make sure you have a signature of the executive that was asking you to skip everything. So it
Yeah.
wasn't you that was skipping past that. But it's the other nice thing about having the guardrails is, especially if you are in in the whole governance risk compliance space, is there might be industry specific rules in place. And
Hmm.
again, guardrails, it's about bowling with the side rails up, so that you
Bumpers.
bounce back and forth, but you're going to go down the lane. But that to make sure that the things that you're doing, if there are SOX compliance, if there's GDPR, if there's things like that, that you need to make sure that your projects and the solutions you're developing, the programs you're working towards, are compliant.
Yeah, I think to your point, the more mature your governance, you know, group, department practice is, the more it can scale to fit the need of what it is you're doing at the time. And it's really identifying, we think about like business rules, right? So what are the business rules that are required to be followed and at what level? And so that you're governing things properly, but you're also the things that need to be tightly governed are tightly governed, and the things that are not don't have a need or a requirement to be tightly governed are allowed to be looser so that they can do the things that they need and have a little bit more bandwidth. So I think the more mature the practice, the more that scalability happens in governance the way that it should.
I was just talking with a former coworker who saw at the conference that we were talking about. This is a company. This is 10 plus years back, and how so we had just so my team, my company, we had just been acquired by another bigger company, and the bigger company. And this is a sales story, and I think Sharon, I think you've heard me talk about this because you know some of the players as well. But they bought they bought the company and about, I don't know, 70, 80 employees with it. And one of the first things that the salespeople from the acquired company did is they went in. There's a governance back behind this, folks, so bear with me. Um, it's storytelling time. So anyway, so with the on the sales, so some of these were just fantastic salespeople that had developed really strong relationships with customers. So now we were acquired by this bigger company, and with it, we had a portfolio of all these new products that we didn't have before. It was in different spaces. So the first thing that the salespeople doing and trying to hit their numbers and getting their bonuses was to reach out to their existing customers and say, hey, we now have these other tools. I really think that you need these. And they were good salespeople, meaning that they only called the customers that they knew actually did need those products. But they had that. In the acquiring company, they had a structure for their sales process. They froze any of that sales activity because those customers had not yet gone through the 7-stage sales process to structure the sale. And we kept arguing on the side of the smaller company being acquired is they trust us. We've been trained on this process. They need this. They want to write a check. Why are you refusing to take their money? So the process got in the way of, and we lost a number of those deals because they didn't want to go through all that. They pushed it off. It was embarrassing for the salespeople, but that was a great example of overdoing it with the overregulation of the focusing so much on the methodology and not enough of what actually needs to be in place today.
Well, it's really too bad that we don't have a lot of examples to talk about how, too much governance causes problems. I know that's really rough for us to come up with good examples for, because it just happens so infrequently. But
It's
I
hard.
think
I know.
it is hard.
Yeah.
But when I talk about, kind of sometimes governance getting in the way, one of my favorite examples is, especially in software, this is something that nobody really deals with, but the inordinate amount of things that we have to do to even like log into things now. So if you think about logging into your bank account or trying to look at your mobile app on your phone for your bank account, we are to the point that I feel like sometimes it's harder for us to access our own information and credentials than it is for somebody who shouldn't, because the level of governance and risk and safety that's around things. And I'm not complaining, because obviously I want my stuff to be safe. But when you get to a point that things and tools and content is unusable, unreachable, unaccessible because of too much governance, I feel like that's the point where you've gone a little too far.
Well, I think it's certainly true in apps and browser apps, web apps and things. Plug and play is dead. It's gone. Remember that? That was like a big thing, a promotional thing like this. Just hook it up, plug it in, and it just starts working. It's like, no, there's too many layers. Because why is that? Is because it's like, why don't organizations do more about risk mitigation? Why does it take a breach to get them to do the right thing? And it's just because organizations will find every way to cut every corner on a cost and overhead. And they usually do that. They cut marketing, they cut training, they cut support, kind of all those things to save a dollar until it bites them.
Yeah.
It's the same with, it can be the same with governance around and having structure and methodology. A lot of organizations that will be very loose, and then things get messy. Timelines slip, just other milestones are missed. There are problems with that. It's not clear whether PMs that are being hired are they are they really busy, or did we hire the wrong people? And I'd say if you've got a bunch of PMs and you've got a hot mess of structure there, then you probably have more junior PMs, because anybody that knows what they're doing will come in, recognize the lack of structure, and one of the first things they'll try to do is put structure in place. And that's a common trait of a good PM, to clean up that mess, so you have more visibility. Yeah.
Well, it's back to maturity, right? The
Right.
more mature the organization, the more mature the individual, the more mature the management. I think the more you understand, the faster you can get a framework in place and get out of the way, the better you're doing.
The other thing too is, I know that I can't remember, Sharon, did you ever go and do like the PMP certification, get your PMI?
I did the original project
I
management
guess
training, and
PMI,
I
PMP.
actually taught some classes around it, but I never actually got my PMP.
Yeah, it's one of those things too where I've at different companies I've paid for the training for people, and I've said, but my point in bringing that up is you got the project management body of knowledge, which is like this
I
tome.
do know that well.
Yeah. I mean, it used to have a copy of it sitting back there when I was building PMOs 20 plus years ago, and have that and use that. But what I would tell any PMs that would come out through that training, I said, I do not want you to attempt to roll out like everything that you've used. I mean, part of the maturity of a PM is to understand which tools to use when, what is necessary. And it gets back into like the culture, understanding the culture of your organization, what is going to fit, what is going to work, what is needed to give that visibility, to give that, put those guardrails up, and what you can leave behind. And it sometimes takes time, because you can overregulate, but then there are problems of the lack of governance. Talking about cultural, aspects of this. I mean, I was thinking about overregulation. So think back, Sharon, companies you've worked with or for, because I know you've seen it with clients as well, because we've had discussions around that. How does excessive oversight, excessive control, how does that impact employees? does that impact, let's talk people first, then let's talk projects.
Well, and I was thinking processes too, but the whole picture. I mean, I come from software development where, before Agile was kind of trendy, we did a lot of waterfall methodology, which means that, we think about, and I did a lot of work in, government spaces where we did, government contracts and things like that. And so it was very heavily, heavily governed, heavily regulated, heavily organized. And I think what ends up happening is, you find that people are sitting around waiting on things. Maybe they don't have what they need. They feel roadblocked a lot. There's not the opportunity to do, to feel empowered to make your own decisions. I think sometimes you're confused on what to do and what not to do because maybe it's not clear, and maybe it even changes occasionally because it's the whole need to know thing where it's like that more heavily it's governed, the more you get told what to do, when you need to know it, when how you need to know it, but then you're just kind of sitting there going, okay, but I don't know what to ask for because I don't know what I need to know because I haven't been told what I need to know yet. So I mean, I think there, you feel kind of out of the loop. You feel, like you're not entirely sure what you can do, and you definitely don't feel empowered to do it, for sure.
That's a big, it is a maturity thing. I remember this when I was a brand new PM of feeling like, well, what can I go and do? I was very much still in the task taker, mindset of, I've not been told what to go and do. I guess I could leave early today. Like, no, there's lots more to do. I'm talking about I'm early 20s, folks. This isn't like months ago. But yeah, until I realized that, I said, well, I kind of understood the whole concept of the backlog, and hey, there's all this other stuff to go and do, and the prioritization, constant reprioritization of the backlog of things. Like, should I complete all my tasks? Here's a huge stack of things to do. And it's kind of, even today, I often talk about, like, I am a full inbox guy. I prefer to have that there, that pressure. Like, I like that. I gravitate towards startups for that reason, because there's a lot to do. There's things that's why I'm not an operational guy. I'm a project guy.
You like being overworked?
That's not what I said, Sharon. But having that full inbox of knowing that there's, because one of the worst feelings for me, little insight in my personality, is not having enough to do. It's awful feeling that way, struggling to, like, what should I be working on? And who do I go to? So if there's not that then speaks to me of a lack of basic structure around that, because there's always things to go and do. It might be that hey, there's a box in the back where we need to sort the contents alphabetically. Is it a huge rush? It needs to be done sometime, but if there's absolutely nothing to do, to go and do those things, so having that structure there in place so that people know, hey, here's the things I need to focus on. If I've got those things done, here's other ways that you can help. Sometimes those other things, and this has been my history, has been to help then go and refine the structure and the process and the documentation, building templates so it's easier the next time, which means we can do more.
So you walk around with a label gun, you that guy?
Sometimes, yeah. It's attached to the belt, so the utility belt. So,
obviously. Yeah. But on the other side of this, and I agree, by the way, I think the more mature the organization, the more mature the practice, the more mature the process, the more mature the individual, I think you're going to find that there is that need and that desire for some sort of architecture and organization and structure, that everybody kind of knows what's going on. We're all on the same page. We know what we can do and when we can do it. We feel empowered to be able to pull from the backlog. We know where the backlog is. I think by creating that, you're giving that. I think on the other side of this, the flip side of it is, what if there's nothing, right? So there's too much, right? I have no idea what's going on because there's so much organization that I'm like just a little peon sitting over here not knowing what's going on, and everybody's kind of need to know.
Right. The ticket taker.
Ticket taker. The flip side of that is, I have no idea what's going on because nobody's like managing anything, and there's no governance, and everybody's just allowed to do whatever they want. I mean, that's just as much of a problem, right?
Right. Well, and I do want to, we use the phrase ticket taker too. And I just, something that just, I had a conversation with one of a person I managed that was part of the support side of the organization. And they were like senior support personnel. They were their personality, like they loved, again, like the full inbox, but theirs was having the structure and support ticket driven. So their mindset was like loving seeing the problems. All right, the ones that were assigned to me, let me go see who else I can help. Let me see what else is on the list, the lower priority items that I could go and do. And they liked that structure of doing the same thing. They could not stand an open-ended a project that doesn't have a clear path of what needs to be done and to go and do it. That was frustrating. Where I'm the exact opposite. The idea of the operations, the ongoing, doing the same thing, that's answering the same kind of questions. Yeah, technology changed all the things. There's differences, but from a role standpoint, they gravitated towards that. Support tickets, solving that problem, being that expert. Where my expertise was, it's open-ended. We don't know. We have to define what this thing is, and then hand that off to operations, which we're going to talk about that exact thing in a future episode. So, the differences between project and operational management of that. But, we've talked a little bit about, so we talked about, the project management body of knowledge and having methodology. And as you and I always say, like every episode, we say it about, Sharon, what do we say about methodologies?
Have one.
Yeah, we don't care which one. Right. Just have one. And so establishing that, what does that actually look like? Having a framework in place. And so depending on your industry, depending on the department that you're in, I mean, there's guidance that's out there. It's kind of like no matter what car you own, there are YouTube videos to fix everything in it.
So much guidance.
So much guidance. And there's good and bad quality videos that are out there for that. But there's a lot of guidance. Similarly, there is so much guidance out there, suggestions on a framework. So this was, again, the comment that I made earlier about at this conference last week, where I would ask people, I said, what's the state of governance inside your organization? And the most common response was, we don't have anything in place.
We have a document. It's 17 years old. Somebody wrote it a long time ago. They put it in a SharePoint site, and I'm pretty sure we follow it.
Well, and you can tease more information. There's few organizations that are, bereft of any type of governance of methodology. There's things that are in there that are cultural aspects of this, the way that we do things. And so starting to ask them about, well, then how does a project begin? I was like, well, we do a kickoff. Oh, hey, well, that's something. That means that there's the culture is that you launch projects, that you pull in or try to pull in the stakeholders and have the framework. Like, so then you ask them, what kind of documentation is there? What are the steps of that? Do you have shared project plans? That's where that detail tends to tank, where there's like, it's so inconsistent, depends on the PM.
Does everybody do the same thing all the time in a way that can be rolled up across portfolios?
At least at a higher level, so that management can say, all right, we have 20 projects that are underway. Here's where they are, the ETA with each one of them based on what we understand today. So having that very high level process structure, that framework is critical. You don't have to have all the answers. The point is that you are, hopefully you can get everybody together that is a key stakeholder, or at the very least, I'd say more like all your project managers and project management adjacent people to get together on a regular basis to talk about the framework, the process itself, not about projects. Use that learning to inform like what's actually happening on the projects you're managing, but have that team discussion, that group discussion about here's the process, here's what we're doing, what works for people, what else do you want to see, what information are you not getting, or what are you hearing from your stakeholders that they're complaining that they're not seeing this, there's not enough visibility, there's whatever that thing is. and talk about that. So doing
I
the
feel like
community focus is so important.
I
Open
feel like
source it, people. Sorry.
I
Yeah.
feel like this is the same conversation as like when you have like a game night with your friends. And especially when you have a handful of people, maybe you've never played certain games with. So I think like, if you play Monopoly or if you play, Rummy or something like that, and you've got house rules, right? So there's the rules that come with the game, and then there's house rules. And everybody kind of plays different ways. And I think it's that same conversation of whenever you're going to play games with people, you sit down and you don't just assume, right? You don't assume that everybody plays the same way. A lot of times you'll have a discussion first and, hey, okay, here's the rules of the game, but do you guys have any house rules you play by that maybe I should know about? How funny is it that we'll do this for games at home or we'll do this with our friends, but then we go into the work setting and we don't have that same conversation. We say, well, this is the way I did it at my job, or this is the way I did it at the last place, or this is the way my manager told me. And everybody's kind of learned this different like house rules kind of thing.
Yeah.
But then we get together and we don't say, how is it that you typically do this? And let's all play by the same set of rules so that we can all agree going in. Otherwise, there's like a little bit of chaos because you landed on free parking. So I get that money, right?
And there's very different rules depending if it's a longer game like Monopoly, which I can't stand Monopoly. My wife loves Monopoly. I always decline to play Monopoly, or something that is fast paced like Exploding Kittens.
I love
Which,
Exploding
folks,
Kittens.
if you don't know, that is an actual game. It's really fun. It's a card game, so go check it out. We earn no proceeds from the sales of any Monopoly from Parker Brothers
Not
or
affiliates, not affiliates.
Exploded Kittens. Not yet. It'll happen for us. We'll get those sponsorships. Yeah. So again, as we talked about earlier, it's you need to longer projects. Like when I was doing working in the data space and working on data warehousing and different facilities and all the servers and the systems and the operations around them, all the applications on the front end of those servers. And I had a project once that was 18 months long, which is a lot shorter than other projects that I'm sure some people watching or have been involved with. But 18 months to plan for an execution of a project that happened over 1-2 day weekend. When systems were physically moved and plugged in and turned back on. And so that Monday morning, end users would have no idea. Well, that was 18 months of planning around that. That has a different structure and methodology and number of steps. So many, internal and external stakeholders involved with that. Customers, groups that were affected by that. It was a lot of planning and coordination to get ready for that. You don't need to have all that structure and the documentation and the meetings to do that for something that could be an under 30-day project to go in. But having that same basic structure, at least it allows you to have a common language around which to discuss those projects and their funding and budget and timeline and resources and all of those other things. So that's huge. Finding that right balance is key for that methodology. And that's why I go back and say, I would tell my brand new, PMI certified project managers and analysts, never apply 100%, never attempt. Like, don't do it. You will, it's like, no offense to anybody out there, but it's like trying to talk friends into, MLMs. Like, you're going to burn bridges. You're going to destroy family connections. It's like, you just don't do it. Don't try to apply that kind of detailed methodology.
Yeah, I think it's about, at the end of the day, it's like, what are you trying to accomplish too? Back to our, conversation at the beginning of finding a balance and finding that right size. I think sometimes, you have to be real clear because there's a difference between finding a balance in, let's say, a government, industry versus maybe a retail industry versus maybe a healthcare industry. Like those are all going to have different needs of balance. And then depending on what project you're trying to accomplish, there are projects that might need more tightly governed processes and controls. And there are projects that might need less governance and controls. So I think part of it is, everybody's like, well, what is the right balance? What is the right balance in governance? And my answer is, well, I mean, just like I'm a consultant, so it depends. But it depends on what your need is out of that particular project or that particular process or that particular thing. So I'd say for every single one, the more you can have some sort of a framework like we're talking about and understand what you need to do, the easier it is when that project comes up to then go down the list and say, what are the needs out of this project? Do they meet any of these particular things that might require tighter control? Do they not meet these needs that require tighter control, so that we can define what that balance is for that particular project?
One more thing I thought of before we jump into our practical strategies and actions is not every organization has leadership, an executive sponsor for all this that are thinking about, how do we create a culture that encourages innovation and collaboration and ownership, versus there's some leaders that are like, hey, look, take the tickets, go do your job. We don't need to have all of this bureaucracy layer over things. And I sort of agree with the don't need the bureaucracy layer, but that's not what we're talking about here. You can have very streamlined, very fast moving. In fact, arguably, you'll move faster with some organization and structure in place than you will without, especially as issues arise, which I don't know about you, but projects tend to not go along the lines of the initial plan. Very, very few. I know it's rare. Again,
very rare, very rare. It's so rare that there was a need for this show.
Yeah. But so I don't know if you've experienced that, where you have like, what do you do if you have a leader that's just like not very supportive?
So, and I think, this comes back to the maturity conversation is, when we think about leaders that, go to that command and control thought. And I think the reason that command and control tends to be a thing, I think, is because they don't trust the people in the process. They're feeling nervous. And a lot of times I think people at a very high leadership level are being held accountable for certain things that sometimes people who are working day to day don't understand. And so, I mean, I have found that in general is if you're doing your job and you put some sort of process around what you are doing, even if you can't control what's above you, the more that leadership tends to be able to trust what's happening, and they see the value in the process. They see the value in the organization. They see the value in putting that scaffolding in place. I think the more they start to be like, wait a minute, I see value there. Maybe we should be doing more of this. So a lot of times people will come to me and say, well, my leadership really doesn't support doing that, so they're not going to do it. And my answer is do it anyways and do the right thing. And if they see the value in it, great. And if they don't see the value in it, maybe somebody else will see your value.
Right. Well, and I think that's a great point too. It's like, yeah, I agree with you. It's like, do the right thing. It's the right way to go and do that. Even if it doesn't extend beyond you and your projects having that, what will happen is that people will see that. They'll see the authenticity of that, of the things that you're doing. They will have then trust it. If I go to Sharon and ask her to do something, and and as I always say, you have to be clinical about project management. You have to talk about like a doctor talk. You don't hide the fact that the patient has cancer. Likewise, they come to you and say like, look, this is what I have. Here's the priorities. I don't like this. Doesn't seem to fit within the highest of priorities, or hey, I think it does fit. Let's go have a conversation together with the stakeholders of these other projects. But the more approaching projects with that kind of framework in place, again, builds that trust. People then start to trust the system and they want more of that. Then they'll ask, well, hey, why can't all the PMs that I work with follow something similar? And you start building that kind of project management office, the PMO approach, that giving that portfolio view of here's all the things that we're doing. And you could build a career around that activity itself. So Yeah, I think do the right things. One other word of advice is, and I always say this to clients of mine when I talk about alliances and channel development, so partner development. It's key when you're trying to work with any bigger company, especially, is to the stakeholders, the people that you're working with, to understand like what are their commitments, what are the things that they're concerned about. So if you're able to have that conversation with your manager or with the executive that should be taking a leadership position in this governance framework, and find out what are the things that are keeping them up at night, what are the data points around that. The more that you can show that these projects and this structure can help them meet or exceed their own goals, the more receptive they'll be to the change around that. So, and every executive has an operational, cost reduction of operational efficiency, has some numbers around that. This plays into both of those categories. So there's a way that you can go define that. And folks, that's kind of a secret working with anybody in business, is find out what metrics, what numbers drive them, what goals that they have. And again, if you can show, it has to be authentic, but if you can show that what you're doing will help them meet or exceed those numbers, they are going to be supportive, almost 100% guaranteed.
Yeah, no, I think and that comes back. It's the whole point of showing value, right? If you can qualitatively show value, people want value, and so the more you can prove to them how to get it, they're interested.
Yeah. Any other practical strategies when you think about this topic? Anything else comes to mind?
I mean, I just want to reiterate, I think the whole making sure everybody's playing by the same set of rules is really how I would look at governance. It's always finding a delicate balance. It's always different depending on who you're with and what's going on. But I think, if there was one lesson I would say to take out of it, it's make sure that you're communicating and that everybody's playing by the same set of rules. And I think that's going to make everything a lot easier.
I think that was where I wanted to end as well, is that we often talk about, communication is one of those things that is often kind of left to the end and should be at the front and center of every project, is how we're going to communicate what's going on, changes, the change management process behind it, project status, the overall portfolio status, all the projects that we're doing as a team or in this organization or business unit, whatever that is. That having those feedback loops, because it's half of it is information going out. The other half is, how are we taking in information? How are we taking in feedback and making changes to this? And that's why, I'm a huge advocate for like project managers inside a larger organization, for example, that get together, and it's almost like a user group of PMs. It's best practices. What's working over there? What's working over here? How can we make change? I'm struggling with something, and relying on getting insights, advice out of other people in the organization, maybe people that have been there longer than you, and get that feedback. But also, so that doing that on at least like a monthly, worst case, like a quarterly basis, but I would say more frequently, it's a support group for PMs. It's a great thing, or PMs and BAs. And then two would be like the actual, like the project management governance body with all the stakeholders brought in. Again, that could be at least monthly, quarterly worst case, but I'd say that your projects are moving too quick. Monthly is the bare minimum. I've been in orgs where we've had them weekly, and which is needed for some fast moving and organizations covering a lot. Every other week is probably the better cadence for that. So twice a month, going through, talking about the structure and then the actual projects. But yeah, communication, number one. So,
yep.
just looking through my notes here too. Anything that gets in the way of decision making. That's another thing, that talking to your executive team around their priorities and be able to communicate with them about those priorities. The other side to that is making it clear what projects need their intervention, need their help. So being it's part of the communication, but sometimes you just need to spell it out. Like, I need you to do this. I would actually do this with leaders. And I said, I need you to send an email. I've drafted it, or here's an outline of what needs to be said in this. Can you please draft this email? And I've even had some executives that's like, look, you write the email, send me the draft of it. I'll tune it and then I'll push it out there, like what you need me to do. So some leaders really appreciate when you are very specific, like, I need you to do this. I need you to go have this conversation. I need your support on this, and this is why. I need you to go to bat against these other executives that are trying to push back. But be open, have that conversation.
No, I think that's a really good point. I mean, I think about that at a governance level, within smaller scopes and larger scopes, is I think, you think about governance coming top down, but you forget that governance can go bottom up as well. And that organic, we talk about like grassroots and things like that, but the idea of making sure that your needs are heard going up is just as important.
Yeah, agreed. Well, it's a great discussion. I know we're going to talk operations again, and for folks that are new to the show here, thanks for joining us. Please follow us out on YouTube or wherever you're seeing this. Out on LinkedIn, if you are a fan of the show, this is a weekly series every week, no breaks. We pre-record some things when we're traveling or we do live shows like this week. We're here answering questions. Please feel free to comment, follow up with any of your thoughts. You can reach us, and I'll put them up again out on X, and as well as out on YouTube. You can find it under my profile, youtube.com/@BuckleyPlanet. And then we also have over the community that we built out over on Facebook. It's a little bit quiet. People are shy. It'll happen. They'll share some things. But please follow us, subscribe, and check out the previous recordings. We have, I think the current count is 41 weeks of planned content for phase 1. And if you are new, Sharon and I are writing a book as well. It's what kind of started this thing was the book first, actually, talking with the publisher and then abandoning that publisher and deciding to do this and do some other things first. So yeah, but anyway, it's great to have this great conversation, get through and talk about this stuff. And Sharon, great to see you.
Yeah, thanks for watching.
And we'll see you all next week. We'll be back again next Monday morning at 9 a.m. Pacific. Talk to you later.